Good morning, Encounter Church. We are so glad to see you here this morning. We hope that you have had a restful week. We hope that you are enjoying your Memorial Day weekend. We are going to start with our worship. We would love if you would stand and sing with us. Heaven thundered, and the world was born. Life begins and ends in the dust you form. Faith commanded, and the mountains moved. Fear is losing ground to our hope in you. Unstoppable God, let your glory go on and on. Impossible things in your name, they shall be done. Freedom conquered, all our chains undone. Sin defeated, Jesus has overcome. Mercy triumphed when the third day dawned. And darkness was denied when the stone was gone. Unstoppable God, let your glory go on and on. Impossible things in your name, they shall be done. Unstoppable God, let your glory go on and on. Impossible things in your name, they shall be done. All right, let's put our hands together, guys. Nothing shall be impossible. Your kingdom reigns unstoppable. We'll shout your praise forevermore. Jesus, our God, unstoppable. Nothing shall be impossible. Your kingdom reigns unstoppable. We'll shout your praise forevermore. Jesus, our God, unstoppable. Nothing shall be impossible. Your kingdom reigns unstoppable. We'll shout your praise forevermore. Jesus, our God, unstoppable. Nothing shall be impossible. Your kingdom reigns unstoppable. We'll shout your praise forevermore. Jesus, our God, unstoppable. Unstoppable God, let your glory go on and on. Impossible things in your name, they shall be done. Unstoppable God, let your glory go on and on. Impossible things in your name, they shall be done. This is the day that you have made. Whatever comes, I won't complain. For all my hope is in your name, and now your joy awaits my praise. I give thanks for all you have done, and I will sing of your mercy and your love. Your love is unfailing. Lord, I am grateful. When I was down, you brought me out. You set my feet on higher ground. So here I stand. You are my God. Your faithfulness, my solid rock. I give thanks for all you have done, and I will sing of your mercy and your love. Your love is unfailing. Lord, I am grateful. I give thanks for all you have done, and won't forget all the battles you have won. Your love is unfailing. Lord, I am grateful. And as we lift our hands up, the heavens open, heavens open. So let our lives declare the love our God has spoken over us. And as we lift our hands up, the heavens open, heavens open. So let our lives declare the love our God has spoken over us. Let's give them thanks, guys. Come on. I give thanks for all you have done, and I will sing of your mercy and your love. Your love is unfailing. Lord, I am grateful. I give thanks for all you have done. I won't forget all the battles you have won. Your love is unfailing. Lord, I am grateful. Who else would rocks cry out to worship? Whose glory taught the stars to shine? Perhaps creation longs to have the words to sing, but this joy is mine. With 1,000 hallelujahs, we magnify your name. You alone deserve the glory, the honor, and the praise. Lord Jesus, this song is forever yours. 1,000 hallelujahs and 1,000 more. Who else would die
eternity to try. With 1,000 hallelujahs, we magnify your name. You alone deserve the glory, the honor, and the praise. Oh, Jesus, this song is forever yours. 1,000 hallelujahs, 1,000 more. Yes, Jesus, we praise you this morning, Father. We give you our praise and our worship, Jesus. Praise to the Lord, to the Lamb, to the King of heaven. Praise, for he rose, he reigns. We will sing forever. Praise to the Lord, to the Lamb, to the King of heaven. Praise, for he rose, for he reigns. We will sing forever. With 1,000 hallelujahs, we magnify your name. You alone deserve the glory, the honor, and the praise. Jesus, this song is forever yours. 1,000 hallelujahs, 1,000 more. Let's sing praise again to the only one who is worthy. Praise to the Lord, to the Lamb, to the King of heaven. Praise, for he rose, now he reigns. We will sing forever. With 1,000 hallelujahs, we magnify your name. Sing, church. The 1,000 more. You may be seated.
How do you define how God feels about you? How do you define the truth? What do you fill your blank with? The truth is, God doesn't care. The truth is, God is mad at me. God seems distant. God isn't real. The truth is, there has to be more to life. But despite how you feel, despite your past, the truth is, God loves you. God does care. God forgives you. God is here. God is real. The truth is, there is more to life.
Good morning and welcome to Encounter Church. I'm so glad that you are here on this really special Memorial Day weekend. A special thank you to those who have served, who have sacrificed, to the families This is just a weekend as a nation that we really get to kind of take a step back and realize that freedom's not free, that it costs something, and that we're really fortunate that we get to live in this place, in this time, that while, we definitely have problems as a nation, it's one of those things that we can be incredibly grateful for, that we get to live here. And so it's also a special kind of, not just weekend, it's a special day for the Causey household, because 18 years ago today, my bride said yes, all right? And so, yeah. And I am so fortunate. We were looking at like wedding photos. Just reminded, I'm like, wow, you married that. My son looked at me, he's like, Dad, you used to have hair. And I'm like, it was for the improvement, son. I look a lot better now than I did back then. It was like, had this front mullet thing going on. I don't even know what that was. And I can't even blame it because it was like the 2000s. So, it wasn't even like the 80s where you could get away with stuff like that. So anyways, but I'm so amazed that I get to have every single day with her. I mean, it's one of those things, if you're married, you hopefully have this experience where, man, I am more amazed at who she is today than I was then. Like, I said yes, but like if we were there today and I was teleported in, man, I wouldn't just be like, yes, I would scream it, because it is so clear that I'm getting the better deal in this thing, right? And just more captivated by her beauty and her character. She is an incredible woman. And I'm grateful that I get to like share her the love that she has, because the family ministry of Encounter Church is what it is because of who she is and the team that she leads. And if your kids love this church, then it's because of my wife and the team that she's been able to lead and put together. And so anyways, I just wanted to say happy anniversary. And yes, because so what we did to actually celebrate our anniversary is about a month ago, we went on a cruise, just me and her, because in our household, we don't call going away with our kids vacation. That is a family trip, right? And that's a good thing. It's going to be a great thing, but it's not vacation, okay? Because you call that a vacation, you come back and you need a vacation from your vacation. So what we call it is a family trip, but when it's just me and her, oh, it's vacation, right? And so we were on vacation, and we were on a cruise, and this was like the first time stepping into one of these cruise lines. And so we were, looking at the activities because it was Caribbean, and it was like, oh, wait, there's one where you can swim with dolphins. And we're like, you know what? Like, let's try that. I mean, this image of like Flipper, and it was like, oh, that'd be so cool, like to get in the water and, like on a cruise ship, everything is kind of paid for already. And so we're like, you know what, let's splurge. Like let's just do this. This will be fun. And so we arrive and we get put on a bus and taken down to this kind of dolphin cove, and we're watching the dolphins swim around and like jump up and like, and it's like this whole thing. We're like, wow, this is amazing. And then we put on life jackets. We step onto the platform in the water, and the dolphin swims. They're like, put your hands out, and the dolphin swims over our hands, and you can feel the dolphin skin. You're like, wow, this is so cool, because this isn't the dolphin experience. This is the dolphin encounter, right? Like you get to like swim with the dolphin, and like the dolphin's gonna like give you a kiss. I mean, it's gonna be memorable. So we're going through all the different things, and we get to kind of like the big moment of the dolphin experience encounter, with the moment where you swim out into the center of the lagoon, and the dolphin will swim up behind you and push your feet through the water. And you like on a boogie board, and you get propelled all the way to the dock. And so we were like, oh, this is going to be amazing. And so this man is the first one to go out. He volunteers. He swims to the center of the lagoon, and they release the big dolphin. Okay, he's a big dude. So I guess they were like, we need some dolphin horsepower behind it. And so he's that dolphin. We see him. He goes out, and the dolphin comes up to the man, circles him, and then tail slaps him. I mean, like hard, like whack. And the guy's like, ugh. And I was like, well, that's interesting. Is that part of the experience? And we're all like, That dude just got slapped by a dolphin. I can't wait to be slapped by a dolphin too. And then the dolphin swims away, and I'm like, I thought he was supposed to push him and give him a kiss. And then the dolphin, I look and I see it. It swam way over there, and now it's moving. It looks like a torpedo. I mean, he is going so fast. And I'm like, oh, man, he's going to really push this guy quick. And he gets to the guy, and the dolphin rams him. And the man is like, oh! And all of us in the water collectively realize we're no longer in a dolphin experience. We're not watching Flipper. We're watching this dude. Like, this man is being attacked by a dolphin. And the trainer realizes it too and is like blowing his little trainer whistle and like doing the squeaks and the pounds and dangling the fish. And the dolphin starts to swim back. And I'm like, okay, it's over. Because like for a half a second, you think, I can swim in there and rescue that man. And then you look at that and you're like, no, he's just going to have to die today, okay? And so, like, we were, like, watching this play out, but the dolphin gets close to the trainer, turns around again, swims even faster at the guy, and this is a big dude. He hits the man so hard, he goes flying up out of the water and hits the water. He's like, oh! And now he's laying on his side, and everybody is freaking out, okay? Like that. Like, the computer just freaked out because that's how terrifying it got. Because we are standing in the water, people, with this thing flying around. And we finally get it calmed down, and the trainers get the alpha male dolphin over to the corner, and they're like, okay, we've figured it out now, and let's continue. And guess who was next? Me. And so me and his girlfriend proceed to swim out into the middle. And like, it was legitimately the most terrifying experience I've ever had. I don't know why I think it's called loss aversion in like psychological literature, because I was like, I am not going to lose my $157. I would rather be attacked by a dolphin, dang it. So I swim out there, and experience his girlfriend is really nice. She literally pushes me across the lagoon, and it's this incredible moment, and there's a picture of it, and it's like a mixture of like, am I about to die, and a smile simultaneously on my face, right? And when I thought about that moment and kind of preparing for this message, I was like, you know what? Honestly, I think that moment was a lot like our mind and our thought life. That Craig Rochelle says your life is moving in the direction of your strongest thoughts. I think we underestimate our mind and our thought life oftentimes. That we think it's like Flipper. It's up there, it's gray, it's kind of doing its thing. And we never think about that moment that it can actually turn and begin to be a terrifying attack force in our life. But for some of us, you've walked through those moments before. You've been in places of darkness and depression, of deep loneliness and despair, and you felt the power that your mind has. You felt the power that your mind has when it whispers into your mind that the other girls look this way and you look this way. We've all been in those places, but we've never kind of physically wrestled it to the ground and realized that this thing sitting on top of our head is quite possibly the most powerful thing in our lives. And I think it's healthy for us to stop treating it like Flipper and to recognize on its good days it can be Flipper, or on its bad days it can be the Jason Bourne of dolphins and completely go after us. And this series, this whole kind of idea of this series has been around realizing and recognizing. In fact, if there was this, it would be what Craig said, I think in a very succinct way, that like our lives are moving in the direction of the strongest thoughts that are playing out here. And last week, I kind of used the conversation to talk about the strongholds, the mental barriers that we need to break through in our lives. But I want to talk about just the everyday thought life. Because breaking through the barriers is like just, surviving the dolphin attack, but you've got to swim with it every day. So what do you do with it? How do you manage it? And to kick us off, I want to just give you a quick quiz. If you were to kind of describe your thought life in general, this is not, you don't have to say this out loud or whisper it to your neighbor, but it's just kind of for you. On a scale of 1 to 10, anxiety, peace, where would you land? Negative, positive, where would you fall? When you think about how your brain works and where you, would people describe you as anxious? Would you describe your brain as anxious and negative? Would you describe it as peaceful and positive? Where do you fall? How would you fill in that blank? Because I think the image I want to give you today is of a garden that's flourishing, that's bringing life. And I think this is the picture of what God intends for our minds to look like. And if you've ever walked by one of these things, if you've ever stood in the midst of a beautiful garden, what you and I both know is this didn't happen by accident. This isn't a byproduct of people neglecting. This came because people intentionally, decisively sought to plant seeds, cultivate the soil, pull up the weeds to create this beautiful space. And this garden imagery is what I want to use today for us to journey towards moving towards that positive, peace-filled mind that God created us. It's to think about, like, your brain is like a Ferrari, right? And so it requires a certain kind of fuel, and it's made to thrive in certain type of places. If you take a Ferrari off-road, you're not going to get very far. But you take a Ferrari to the Autobahn, and watch out. And I want us to really kind of clue into some areas in our own thought life that we can cultivate, that we can begin to work on, so that this is a picture, this is a visual of what our minds could begin to look like. And this does come from the heart of God. And not just his heart, but his words and his wisdom. In fact, the passage I want to look at today, written almost 2,000 years ago, walks us through how to cultivate this, how to start to intentionally foster this type of environment in our mind. It was written by a guy named Paul to a church in a city that was fairly unique in its day called Philippi. And Paul, towards the end of his letter, turns towards this section that, unless you read it carefully, you don't realize it's all interconnected. Paul loves these people. He sees the joy that they have. He recognizes the way that they've been so critical in the ministry that he has. And so he's writing to them this overall positive flowing letter. And towards the end, he's like, gives them this really practical advice around their thought life. And I use the image of a garden because you'll see in a second, there's 3 different pieces of advice in the midst of this thing that I think the garden image helps us to memorize a little bit better. He begins with, rejoice in the Lord always. Philippians chapter 4, verse 4. I will say it again, rejoice. Now, Paul begins this section with calling them to rejoicing. And he says always. This is not circumstantial. This isn't like, well, depending on the day and the calendar and what's going on in your life. He's like, no, every single day, I want you rejoicing. And as if somehow they missed it the first time with the rejoice always, he says, let me say it one more time, rejoice. He's commanding it. It's not good advice. He's not just saying, hey, this would be great to try. He's like, you have to do this. This is essential. And I think that what Paul begins to do here when he says, let your gentleness be evident to all. Have you ever noticed that people who are stressed out, people who are overwhelmed, gentle is not the word you would use to describe them, would you? They're a little sharp. They're a little, sorry I was short. It's quick with you. A little less forgiving. A little bit more irritable. Not gentle. This is one of the things that becomes, he's like, look, not only are you doing this thing, it's going to be obvious to people. Let them see that you have this. He says, the Lord is near. Do not be anxious about anything. Do not be anxious about anything. But in every situation, by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. this with thanksgiving, rejoice. Now, what Paul's introducing at the very beginning of this conversation around the mind, to use the garden illustration, is an intentional focus on cultivating the right kind of soil. See, the more you learn about gardening, the more you learn about just how do you actually foster and cultivate life, is that it's not about what's being planted and what you do, it's about what it's being planted in. The soil matters. That what's in your soil, what's lacking in your soil matters. And that for many of us, I think for all of us probably, we would all raise our hand and say, you know what, I want a positive, peace-filled life. I want my mind to just kind of radiate and resonate to the point that people see the gentleness that's overflowing. Because I'm not flipping through social media, completely consumed with what other people have. I'm not looking at their lives, constantly comparing and feeling insecure and feeling like I'm lacking something. I don't have to constantly walk into every conversation socially completely wrecked by anxiety or trying to kind of cover up my own junk and be threatened by their stuff. But to walk in and just be peaceful and positive and encouraging, like, I think we all want that. And Paul says, look, the starting point is that soil that you have to cultivate intentionally. A soil that has to be filled with gratitude and thanksgiving. Which is fascinating. This is like almost 2,000 years ago. And now modern researchers have stumbled upon this great idea that, you know what, gratitude's really important. But why is gratitude important? So in my senior year of college, I was a biochemistry, kind of biology, chemistry double major for a season there. So I took interesting courses where I thought they were interesting. Maybe most of you would be like, boring. Or like my son says, boring. So one of the really, I thought, very fascinating classes was animal psychology. In the lab for the animal psychology classes, we literally learned how to train animals. Drug dogs, bomb dogs. Our big project for the senior class was to go to the zoo and begin to learn to catalog animal behaviors, predict what they're for, and actually keep a running tally. Like, we had to understand and begin to think like animals. So it was a super fascinating class and really enjoyed it. But at no point in animal psychology was there a lecture on the importance of gratitude for animals. There's no point, there was no driving point that, like, gratitude, thanksgiving is essential for the lion to thrive. It's not. Because we are spiritual creatures with physical bodies, gratitude is unique to us. Because it is our interchange with God. It is a distinctly essential discipline in spiritual life. And if we lack it, then the soil that we have to grow with is not going to grow the greatest things. And so this is why Paul's starting with, hey, are you intentionally, regularly rejoicing, thanking God, being grateful for what you have? And one of the questions I posed to my daughter, because in our household we say the Causeys are grateful people. That's a family value. One of the questions I'll periodically post just to flip her thinking is like, hey, if tomorrow morning you woke up with only the things that you thank God for today, what would you have? I guess a terrifying question if you let it simmer. What would you have tomorrow in your household if the only things that existed were the things that you thank God for today? It's not meant to terrify you. It's meant to expose that oftentimes we take for granted so many good things around us. And that no matter where we are in life, the reality is oftentimes we have more to be grateful for than we have to complain about. There is more positive in our life than there is negative. And when he says walk around, cultivate gratitude, reflect, be thankful, even in the moments when you're kind of going through some stuff and you're not enjoying it, I still want you to find joy in it. Walk through it with thanksgiving, with gratitude. And what it does is it really does start to shift the soil of your life. And one of the tests of whether or not you've got gratitude down isn't just that, well, I have some kind of gratitude journal. You don't have to have a gratitude journal. Although if you've never started practicing gratitude, create a note on your phone or in a booklet, and every single day, 3 to 5 things that you're grateful for that day. Just write it down. Try it for like two weeks. I promise you, your life will be different. Because when you start to cultivate the discipline of gratitude, you start looking for things to be grateful for, all of a sudden you're like, man, I've got a lot more good in my life than I realized. And this starts to shift. I heard someone say, it's hard to be stressed when you realized you're blessed, right? Like stressed and blessed don't occupy the same space at the same time. And this isn't just pie in the sky, ignore the bad things. No, I'm not saying ignore the bad things. Look, I am a really grateful person, which is extraordinary because I am also simultaneously, in my natural predisposition, Eeyore. Okay, like I am the Eeyore-ist of the Eeyore-ist. Okay, I see it in my son, and I'm always like, I'm sorry, Jenny, like that's my bad. I totally did that to him. That's straight up. That came from me. That's not from you. You're like walking sunshine. If you've ever interacted with my daughter, she is like the Lego movie. I mean, where it's like, everything is awesome. Everything, it's like, it's just great and grand. And then I'm like, the cloud follows me. Okay? So if I can be grateful, then you can too. And it really is. It's hard to be stressed. It's hard to complain. It's hard to be defined by the bad in your life when you are constantly inventorying the good in it. I mean, I literally am so grateful that I get to be married to Jenny, that I get to be the parents of my kids. And I think for most people, no matter how bad you feel like your marriage may be at this point or how jacked up your situation is with your kids, the reality is that if you spent time reflecting on the good, you'd feel an internal shift. Because there's just something about sitting in that and letting that wash over you, that it does something to you. It's the soil. And out of that soil is where we intentionally want to cultivate the garden. So Paul, before he ever talks about how to think, he talks about the soil that we need to make sure that we have. Because this is the type of soil where right thinking is going to flourish. Right? So he moves. He says, finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. He's like, hey, we got the soil down. Let's move to your thought life. And I think this is more implied. This is implicit, not explicit. But he has to tell them to think this way. Because Paul understands something that is now currently right now driving the conversation culturally around one of our most revolutionary technologies. One of the lawyers, so a couple years ago, there was on this airline, a man was sitting and kind of in a rushed moment, an airline steward ran by and nailed his knee with an airline cart. And as you can imagine, that didn't feel very well and it caused some damage. So he does what so many people do. He decides to sue. He gets a lawyer who's been practicing law in New York for about 3 decades to sue this company. And as a part of the proceedings, just a couple months ago, this plays out, the lawyer sent a 10-page brief. And the essence of his argument, he says, the tolling effect of the automatic stay on a statute of limitations. So he's arguing around the statute of limitations. And he quotes Martinez versus Delta Airlines and Korea Airlines and China Southern Airlines. He's quoting all of these different case studies and quotes from these case studies, and he sends it into the judge. And the judge summons him and begins to ask him questions and says, hey, I've reviewed your brief. I can't find a single one of your quotes. I can't find a single one of these case studies. What happened? You've been practicing law for 3 decades. You've cited cases that doesn't seem to exist anywhere in legal doctrine. And the lawyer looks up and says, Judge, I want to apologize. I think I've made a terrible mistake. I'd heard about ChatGPT, and so I decided to try to write this legal case using it. So I presented the case to ChatGPT, and it produced this document citing all of these different legal cases as the standards for why our case was so strong. And the judge said, do not realize that ChatGPT and artificial intelligence tends to hallucinate. And he says, no, Your Honor, I did not know that. Turns out that none of the cases actually were real. Artificial intelligence had completely made it all up. And that man's legal case and that lawyer who had been practicing law for 30 years looked like fools. And there's been a lot of discussion around AI and artificial intelligence and hallucination and the way that it'll tell you a story and then in reality that story never had. It just made it up. It's like a toddler, right? And I think all AI has done, because it is literally sourced, it's large language models sourced out of human thought, ideas, and writings. So AI is nothing more than mechanizing the massive amount of human thought that already exists. It is a magnification of our strengths and our weaknesses around our mind. That Paul understood this long before there was a discussion around ChatGPT 3 or 4 or BARD or whatever large language model that'll be the next thing that breaks onto the news. Like, Paul already understood that this thing that we have is broken. And then can just as easily create a false narrative as it can something that's true. Because we're good storytellers. Our brains are story generators. And the problem is that some of those stories are fiction and faulty. This is why he says, think about such things, because the implicit warning is that there are other things that we can think. And I just want to give you a couple, just 3 of them that I think are common, just briefly, just so that you and I can start to stick some labels on these things. The first one is emotional reasoning. This is when we use our feelings as a substitute for thinking. And we don't even recognize we're doing it. Right? It's, I feel like a bad mother. I feel like a bad father. And so we jump to, therefore, I must be a bad mother. You know, have an emotional outburst, and your child's like, I'm a bad child. I'm a bad son. I'm a bad daughter. I'm always a failure. And what they didn't tell you is before that was verbalized, there was a preceding thought that was actually an emotion that says, I feel like a bad child. And this emotional reasoning, unless you begin to stick labels on it, you won't even see it. It just happens quickly. And I think the thing that's really important when you start to stick a label on it is that feelings are real. So it's not knocking the reality those emotions are there. But they aren't always true. And this is a really important flip, a switch that you can turn when you start to recognize this emotional reasoning can be one of those faulty, to use the garden analogy, weeds that can grow up in our soil. We have to rip them up when we see them pop up. It's always easier to pull it up right after it breaks out of the ground than it is to let it get established, and because it spreads. It's like a dandelion. It just starts to permeate and fill empty spaces. And this emotional reasoning is for some of you, it may be your real struggle. And I want you to know it may be a real struggle, but those feelings aren't always true. And for you to, that disciplined, intentional movement of being able to separate the two and actually ask the question, is it true? Another one is mind reading. This is another weed that can pop up in our kind of thought life garden. This is when we project on other people. Sometimes they actually explicitly will say to you, or you'll explicitly say to them, I know what you're thinking. I'm like, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize that you plugged into my brain. I didn't realize that you had cracked my code and somehow figured that out. No, I know what you're thinking. And it's like, no, you don't. I promise you, you don't. Because as random as my brain is, it probably just generated that dolphin coming up out of the water with a laser beam attached to it. That probably just happened while you were talking to me. And I almost will guarantee that you probably don't have that one in your brain right now. But we do this. We project on the others. We're like, I know that's what you're thinking. I know that's what they think about me. Did you see the way they looked at me? I know what they were thinking. We do this all the time in our interactions with others. And what happens is we're just absolutely convinced we're right and true. And yet none of us that I'm aware of have an ability to actually read someone else's mind. That unless they say it, we shouldn't think they're thinking it. You know, it can play out. We make assumption about others' thought without having any evidence to support them. So there are sometimes maybe someone is thinking certain things. And you can be confident or more confident because you actually have evidence. But when we just throw and project onto others what we think they're thinking because it's really a projection from us onto them, then that can be destructive in our thought life. So being cognizant that this could be one of the weeds growing in your garden of mind reading. Another one, you know, this is kind of, you know, this is sometimes, they think blank. I know they have better things to do than blank with me. Like, it's just, what are you filling in the blank with when it comes to mind reading? Label it. Get explicit about it. The third kind of one, which is pull out, and there's over a dozen of these things, from like should statements, which is my own personal struggle when I'll think I'll come out of a conversation or I'll come out of a moment and I'm like, I should have done that. And I put the weight of me knowing all the information that I know in my present on me and my past. Well, it's like, look, if I had known NVIDIA was going to jump 38% last week, I would have invested in that stock. But reality is I didn't know that, so I didn't do that. But when you walk out and you're like, I should have done that. That's my own personal struggle. But this is one of the more popular ones: fortune telling, forecasting, right? Where we project based on the situation. We do it in two different ways. We do it either because we're overgeneralizing or catastrophizing. Overgeneralizing is we had it happen to us once, and so we think that's the playbook for how it's going to happen every single time. And we just project it. You had one bad experience, and it becomes the driver for how you view all the other potential experiences or the other relationships. Catastrophizing, that's when, if you've ever sat across from someone and it starts off with they stub their toe, and by the end of the journey, they feel like they may have to have it amputated. And you're like, how did we go from you stubbing your toe to you wanting to schedule a surgery? Well, it's because they're catastrophizing. They're like, well, you know, this relationship, I know it's, the goal is it's oftentimes protective. We do all of these things to protect without the realization of how they're going to wreck our lives. So, you know, convinced this relationship is going to end poorly even when it's just starting because that's how all the other ones ended. Like, some of us will write off the future we could have because we're convinced of the future we're already sure we will. And this is fortune telling. These are all the weeds. And I don't know about you, but which one of these, if you had to pick three, or maybe the should, or the negative filtering where everything comes in and automatically skews negative, like which one of these would be your struggle, the one that you kind of bump up against? Because if you can grab hold of the label, then you can start to loosen its power and control over your life and become aware that it's there in your general thought life. But Paul, when he's saying think about such things, is actually highlighting this: true, noble, right, pure, lovely, admirable, excellent, or praiseworthy. Paul's doing this practically because in the ancient world, these were pre-literate people as a society. The average person did not have any access to reading. They had no ability to pick up a scroll or a codex and just read. And so when you communicated, one of the kind of popular ways of communicating, it was like the ancient memes of the day, was to use short lists. Short lists were portable. They were really practical. You could take them with you. You had them in your mind. And this is one of them. This is a list that Paul gives them to help them think. He's like, hey, look, I'm telling you, beware of the weeds. Here are the seeds you want to plant in your garden. Here are the things you want to cultivate inside of your mind. Think about these things. So here's a portable list as you're going through your day. You can just kind of compare. It's like your vegetation, your mind vegetation identification guide. You're walking through and you're like, what kind of plant is that? Well, is it true? Is it noble? Is it right? Is it pure? Is it lovely? Is it admirable? Is it praiseworthy or excellent? Nope. Then you need to uproot it. And then you move to the next thought. Is that true? And it's like, yeah, okay. Oh, actually it meets. Okay, that can stay. This portable list was meant to take them through the course of their everyday and practically help them in cultivating that mental life. And we don't have time to work through them all. Some of them, honestly, they're really clear to us today. That the right way of thinking almost 2,000 years ago still seems to ring true today because of a reason. That we're spiritual beings created by God, that our brains were meant to run on this type of fuel. And so naturally, we still are moved by these things. When we watch a movie and we see someone sacrifice selfishly for the good of others, something inside of us is stirred. When you go to a parade or you listen to a story of someone who lost their life or sacrificed at Memorial Day weekend, you can't help but be inspired. It's noble. Well, all that's coming from, this is what your brain was designed to run on. Truth, noble, higher ways of thinking that elevate us out of the gutters of our mind that we can oftentimes, or the ditches that we can fall into, of pure, right? Like, we all remember this from middle school, when the kids who are completely engulfed in some of the thinking that begins to emerge, everything that gets said gets giggled at because it gets distorted and turned into a little dirty joke. Right? I mean, if you've ever worked with middle schoolers for years, and when I'm talking to them and I would see them like, hee, and I'd be like, oh goodness, what did I just say? And then I'd have to go and look up like Urban Dictionary and realize like, now that's a saying, and so you can't say that word because that word is like that word for them now. But I mean, this is a human thing that you bump up against. So it's like, hey, what are you cultivating in your mind? It's really hard to treat people with dignity and respect in the opposite sex if you privately are constantly objectifying them. You can't. Is it pure? Is it lovely, admirable, excellent, or praiseworthy? And what I love, what Paul is doing here, he's not just saying, hey, I want you to walk around like some weird little Christian robot being like, I'm so blessed, you so blessed, I only think about Scripture and sing Christian songs. I'm sorry, I cannot listen to YouTube because there is no Jesus in there. Like, he's not saying that. When he talks about excellent and praiseworthy, he's actually making these fully encompassing things. He's like, if it is admirable, praiseworthy, if it is something that elevates you to God or elevates humanity in a beautiful way, think about those things. Standing in front of a beautiful painting and being moved at the artistry is included in this list. Because we either will plant the seeds that grow weeds in our mind, or we will plant these intentional seeds in our lives. out of the soil of gratitude that we're meant to foster. Like these are the things. And so just looking at the list, is there one of these that you need to foster more? Some of you, the noble, lovely, I want to give you permission to stop watching the news for a few weeks. Okay? I want to give you permission to turn off the cable news networks, to unsubscribe to the New York Times newsletter. And I'm not picking on the New York Times. You fill in the blank with whatever group you want to put in there. But for some of us, we just need to shut it down for a little bit and watch what it does to our mind. Some of you might just need to delete that social media app for a few weeks. Because what we don't realize is that we keep letting these things in, and what comes in eventually comes out. And to foster this list in our life is what Paul is calling us to. Because it's hard to have a positive life when you have a negative mind. If you're bumping up, why isn't my life more positive? The starting point is your mind negative? It's hard to have a peace-filled mind when you're constantly cultivating the anxiety. When you're constantly ruminating and worrying. And we have, according to Paul, an ability, because you can't command something to people that they can't do. So his command is to cultivate, to fill in the blank intentionally. And this is how I want to end. I want to tell you about orcas. All right? Specifically, one orca named White Gladys. Okay? White Gladys has been making the news recently because White Gladys has started a movement among orcas off the Iberian Peninsula. Okay? Random fact that you might use on Jeopardy is orcas are very faddish creatures. Literally about 5 years ago, one orca decided to kill a red salmon and to swim around it with on top of her head, and it became a thing that spread. Orcas began to swim around with dead red salmons on their head like a hat. That actually happened. Not making that up. It was a fad. Orcas do that. It became a fad for a season with orcas to play with jellyfish or to try to see how long they could swim with jellyfishes on their nose. Again, it became a fad. Orcas, regionally started doing it. And there's been a recent fad that they think maybe is a little bit more than just a fad. And White Gladys is the leader. She's the originator. It's this tendency off the coast of Portugal, right near the Strait of Gibraltar, for orcas to attack sailboats. Okay? It's been happening since 2020, but like all good movements, it takes a while to catch on fully. Okay? And so this past month, over 20 ships have been attacked off the coast. A couple of them have been sunk, including this one right here. And what they've been able to figure out is White Gladys started it because there's only a handful of pods who are actively doing this. White Gladys usually is in the front, and she will have juvenile orcas around her. Periodically, it'll be just a pod of juvenile orcas, but they're the juvenile orcas who learn from White Gladys. And she's taught them how to attack and sink sailboats, which is incredible and incredibly terrifying. Because an orca is a massive creature. I mean, you think a dolphin with a laser beam is terrifying. Imagine an orca. And the first thing they do, that she's trained them to do, is rip off the rudder so that they can't move the boat. And then they begin to ram the boat and create holes and strand the people in the water. And what they can't figure out, is this just a fad they're doing for fun, like the red salmon? Or is this Gladys really seeking revenge from possibly being hit by a boat when she was younger? And she's trying to train the young ones to be aware. But regardless, what it illustrates is this powerful principle that's present in nature and super present in humans, which is the power of example. That's why Paul says this. Whatever you have learned or received, this is how he ends, or heard from me or seen in me, put it into practice. And the God of peace will be with you. I know for so many of us, when we think about thought life, when we think about regaining and transforming how we think about life, it can feel almost impossible to be able to overcome and to have freedom or to gain control. And I think it's helpful for us to know that when Paul writes this letter telling them to rejoice, when Paul writes this letter telling them, hey, specifically, I want you to think about what's true and right and noble and lovely and pure and admirable and excellent and praiseworthy, when he's commanding them to think that way, he's doing all of that while sitting in a prison cell shackled. Because Philippians is written from a prison cell. And Paul is saying, hey, you saw me when I was with you, climbing uphill, beginning the church in Philippi, dealing with some of the pressures that came as a result of that, and how I stayed positive and peaceful. And now I'm writing you these things, commanding them to you from inside of a prison cell, shackled. Because my body may be chained, but my mind is free and liberated. And if Paul can do that, he's saying, look, you can do that too. If I can rejoice in a prison cell, surely you can find something to rejoice in your circumstances. If I can write these words to you in a prison cell, surely there's something noble and lovely in your life too. That it is possible, even when your body is chained or restrained in a hospital bed or in a prison or in a bad negative work situation, that your mind can still move freely and have life and be a garden that you've cultivated, where the soil that is flourishing and bringing life out of gratitude isn't to weeds, but it's to seeds of right and pure and lovely thoughts. That in the end actually produces peace, but not just produces peace. It actually invites heaven to be present with you. That God of peace will be with you. Paul's like, he's here with me now. He can be here with you too. That no matter what you walk through, no matter what your brain has done to you or what you have done to your brain, there is a new frame that I want to invite you to walk in, and a new place that I want you to start living in. That you and I, because of what Jesus has done and the power of resurrection living inside of us, can begin to fill in the blank on purpose with peace and positivity. Let's pray. Jesus, thank you. Thank you for your grace, your mercy, and the way that you care about our thought life, and the way that you help us cultivate a positive, more peace-filled thought life. I pray, Dad, for those who are in the room or listening online who have maybe struggled with certain tendencies or have certain weeds that have grown up in their garden, that you would use this truth to help us begin to label those things that need to be uprooted. That we would, in our own lives, ask you, in our own ways, cry out to you to help us make room in our mind, to make room in our soul for you and for what you do when you start to transform and renew. I pray that not just that this message, but that this entirety of this series would be the starting point for so many of us, intentionally cultivating in our own lives, in our own minds, and those around us who we love and who we get to lead, to help them foster this beautiful garden that brings life. And thank you that it's not just pie in the sky, but that you very practically, very personally desire us to see it happen. So help us make room for that. In your name, Jesus, I pray. Amen. So today we're going to close out, really we want the entire series, because next week we'll kick off a brand new series I'm excited about, and it's a complete turn. So it's, we'll move on from this. But this is something that you and I need to move into, even as we collectively series move on to something else. And so we wanted to introduce a song called Make Room. And Make Room is really a prayer of, God, can you help me? It uses the word surrender this to you. For some of us, the very first step in our lives is it's really hard to have peace in our minds if we don't have peace in our souls. We have unanswered questions about who we are and where we stand before God. That those questions are the most essential questions, the very first questions to get answered before we move into transforming our minds into a place of peace. Now, for some of us, it may be just saying to God, I want to make room for you, period, God. Like this past week, in conversations with people, and over the past month of just helping people process their own spiritual journey and realizing, man, God is for you. He loves you. He made a way for you to return to him, that there is nothing that you've ever done or you could do. There is no shame or guilt that hangs over you that can stop you from finding life in him, because he took those things to the cross with him and then broke out of the tomb, offering you and me, offering anyone who turns to him, freedom, forgiveness, grace, new life. Maybe for some of you, that's the surrender that needs to happen. To say, God, I want to become a Christian. I want to start to follow you. I recognize I've done things that put things in between me and you, and that you have constantly pursued me, and so I just turn to you. For some of you, the surrender may be those areas, those weeds, the lack of gratitude in your life that you need help with him to step in to help cultivate. So whatever it may be, I just want to encourage you in the last few minutes that we have today, before we move into this beautiful kind of extended weekend, that we would just say to God, would you make room for me? God, would you make room in my mind, my heart, my soul? I surrender it to you. Bring fresh life. Bring peace. Bring this overarching, positive, kind of heaven-oriented perspective into my situation, circumstances, and relationships. So I want to invite you to stand as our team leads us in this song.
Every burden, every crown, this is my surrender. This is my surrender. Here is where I lay it down. Every lie and every doubt, this is my surrender.
Do whatever you want to.
up the ground of all my tradition. Break down the walls of all my religion. Your way is better. Your way is better. Shake up the ground of all my tradition. Break down the walls of all my religion. Your way is better. Your way is better. Shake up the ground of all my tradition. Break down the walls of all my religion. Your way is better. Your way is better. Shake up the ground of all my tradition. Break down the walls of all my religion. Your way is better. Your way is better. And I will live for you to do whatever you want to do whatever you want to. And I will make room for you to do whatever you want to do whatever you want to. Here is where I lay it down. You are all I'm chasing now. This is my surrender. This is my surrender. Here is where I lay it down. You are all I'm chasing now. This is my surrender. This is my surrender.
Hope you enjoyed that song and just allow it to kind of serve as maybe an anthem and as a prayer for you as you go into this extended weekend and into this week. We want to thank you for being here today, for being a part of our gathering. And next week, we're going to be kicking off a new series, really excited about, called Investigating Jesus. We're just going to look at who Jesus is and why, as Christians, we can have confidence, and why, as maybe some people who are exploring Christianity, we can actually have confidence that maybe this Christian thing is a little bit more than we realize. And so we're super excited about next month and kicking off that. But we're going to start that series with celebrating baptism. And so we're super excited about what God is doing in the hearts and lives of people here. And so if maybe today you surrendered and you just in your heart, you're like, God, I want to begin that relationship with you. Or you've done that over the last few weeks, was having a conversation this week with someone around this. That baptism is a great next step after you start following Jesus. And we would love to share more about that, talk with you about it. Because next Sunday, we're going to do that as a church and celebrate baptism. So I hope you have an incredible week. We look forward to seeing you back here next week. God bless you. Have a great Memorial Day weekend. Bye.
Shake up the ground of all my tradition. Break